If you think the Jeffrey Epstein investigation began with a police raid in Palm Beach in 2005, you are wrong. The 2026 files reveal that the FBI received a credible complaint about Epstein stealing photos of underage girls a full decade earlier in 1996. Their own agency characterized this case as involving child, and then they did absolutely nothing. That single decision created a decade of dereliction. While law enforcement looked away, Epstein didn't just abuse girls, he built an industry scale trafficking pyramid scheme right under their noses. We know that he scored a perfect 100% on the clinical scale for successful psychopathy. We know billionaires like Richard Branson were emailing him casually joking about his harem. And we know that when 3.5 million pages of files finally dropped in 2026, the government botched the release so badly they exposed the victims' medical records while keeping powerful men redacted. This isn't just a story about a dead vendor. It is the blueprint of a protective architecture designed to let the elite exploit the vulnerable, and today we are taking it apart. दोस्तों, ये कहानी सिर्फ जेफरी एप्स्टीन की नहीं है. It is the story of the machinery that allowed a college dropout to blackmail the world's most powerful leaders. To make this video, I didn't just read the headlines. I analyzed the massive 3.5 million pages data dump released by the US Department of Justice in 2026, cross-referencing it with forensic timelines, FBI internal memos, and post-mortem psychological dossier that go back 30 years. By the end of this video, you will understand something terrifying. Epstein wasn't a glitch in the system, he was a feature of it. You will see how elite deviance, a concept sociologists use to explain crime of the powerful, protected him. You will learn how he built a protective architecture using money, science, blackmail to silence victims and law enforcement alike. और ये आपके लिए ज़रूरी क्यों है? Because whether it is New York or New Delhi, the game is the same. Just as we see VIP culture shield the powerful in India, this story reveals the universal blueprint of how the 1% manipulate the justice system to operate above the law. आज हम उस सिस्टम का पोस्टमार्टम करेंगे. To understand the monster, we first have to dismantle the myth. The story Jeffrey Epstein told the world was a classic American rags to riches fairy tale. Born in 1953 in Seagate, a middle-class gated community in Brooklyn, he was the son of a park groundskeeper and a school aide. He was a math prodigy, a piano virtuoso, a kid who skipped 2 grades and graduated high school at 16. The narrative was simple. He was a hidden genius who pulled himself up by his bootstrap. लेकिन दोस्तों, when we look at the actual records, the genius falls apart. Epstein attended Cooper Union and the NYU, but here is the first red flag. He dropped out of both. He never earned a college degree, yet in 1974, this 21-year-old dropout managed to land a job teaching calculus and physics at the Dalton School, one of the most elite prep school in Manhattan, where the children of Rockefellers and Rothschild studied. How does a college dropout gets hired to teach the elite? He was hired by headmaster Donald Parr, the father of future Attorney General Bill Barr. It's a connection that conspiracy theorists love, but the reality is perhaps more disturbing. Donald Barr was known for unconventional hires, but Epstein's tenure at Dalton wasn't just unconventional. It was a testing ground for his future crimes. Sources from the Times describe a teacher who shattered boundaries. He didn't dress like a faculty member. Reports from the New York Times and former students describe him wandering the halls in a fur coat, gold chain, and an open shirt exposing his chest. He wasn't just cool, he was predatory. Students recall him constantly being surrounded by a circle of girls. One former student described a mild sense of creepiness, nothing that his conduct left an impression that lingers for decades. This wasn't eccentricity. This was the early manifestation of what forensic psychologists later identified as Factor 1 psychopathy. Superficial charm mixed with a complex lack of boundaries. He was testing the waters, and just like his later life, when he crossed the line, he wasn't arrested, he was quietly dismissed. In 1976, he was fired from Delton for poor performance. In the real world, getting fired for incompetence usually sets you back. For Epstein, it was a promotion. This is the quantum leap mechanism we talked about. While at Delton, he had tutored the son of Alan Ace Greenberg, the CEO of Bear Stearns. Instead of checking his credentials, Greenberg saw a PhD, someone poor, smart, and determined, and hired him. Suddenly, the failed teacher was a floor trader on the Wall Street. At Bear Stearns, Epstein reinvented himself. He lied about his credentials, but his aggressive narcissism and ability to manipulate wealthy people made him a star. By 1980, just 4 years after joining as a junior assistant, he was named a limited partner. He specialized in tax avoidance strategies for the ultra wealthy, learning exactly how the 1% hide their money. But the pattern repeated. Epstein thought he was smarter than the rule. In 1981, he was suddenly forced out of Bear Stearns. The official reason? A Reg D violation, an obscure rule about lending money to friends to buy stock. But insider says it was very serious stuff involving misleading management. Once again he was caught. Once again he faced no legal consequences. He simply spun the story, telling people he left to start his own firm because he was too big for Bear Stearns. He started Intercontinental Asset Group, marketing himself as the bounty hunter recovering stolen money from the dictators and billionaires. It was a lie, but it sounded expensive, and it's the 1980s, so that was enough. By the late 80s, Epstein had perfected his persona, the mysterious financier who didn't answer to anyone. But a parasite needs a host. He needed someone with real, hard billions to legitimate his smoke and mirrors. He needed a golden ticket, and in 1986, he found him in Columbus, Ohio, a retail giant who was building an empire called The Limited, and who was about to hand Jeffrey Epstein the keys to the kingdom. His name was Leslie Wexner, and what happened next wasn't just business, it was a total takeover. Doston, by the late 1990s, Jeffrey Epstein wasn't just rich, he was constructing a world where he was the only law. To the outside observer, he was a modern-day Great Gatsby, a mysterious billionaire who managed money for the ultra-wealthy. But if you looked closely, the math didn't add up. Trading desk on Wall Street didn't know him. He left no footprints in the snow. So how did he project such immense power? He built a stage. It started with a plane, a Boeing 727, customized with a bedroom and a trading floor, which the tabloids would later grimly nickname the Lolita Express. Journalist Michael Wolff described a flight he took in the late 90s. He recalls Epstein arriving on board not with a business partner but with 3 young women, model-like and very tall. Wolff asked himself a question that would haunt the elite for decades. Who is this man with this very large airplane and with very tall girls? This plane was his primary tool for social arbitrage. In 2002, he flew former President Bill Clinton, Kevin Spacey, and Chris Tucker to Africa. At that time, Clinton's office praised Epstein as a committed philanthropist with a keen sense of global market. They didn't see a predator, they saw a generous donor. And it wasn't just Democrats. The 2026 file contains a prosecutor's note from January 2020 revealing that Donald Trump flew on Epstein's jet many more times than previously has been reported, including flights where he was the only passenger listed beside Epstein. Whether it was politicians, princes, or scientists, Epstein used the jet to trap them in his orbit, literally up in the air where he was the captain. If the plane was the trap, the island was the cage. In 1998, Epstein bought Little St. James for 7.95 million. He transformed this 72-acre rock into fortress. He didn't just build a mansion, he built a controlled environment. But here is the detail that shifts this from luxury to espionage. Maria Farmer, the artist who filed that ignored 1996 FBI complaint, described a media room in Epstein's New York mansion hidden behind a secret door. Inside, she saw banks of monitors connected to pinhole cameras hidden in the bathrooms and bedrooms. She told investigators, "I looked on the cameras and I saw toilet, bed, bed. It was very obvious they were monitoring private movements." Sources confirm that Little St. James was similarly wired. Ghislaine Maxwell reportedly told a friend that the island was rigged with video surveillance as insurance policy. Epstein wasn't just hosting the elite, he was recording them. This created the terrifying possibility that the abuse wasn't just for gratification, it was for co-prompt, the Russian term for compromising material used for blackmailing. To cover these dark operations, Epstein needed a mask of extreme respectability. He didn't just buy houses, he bought brains. He donated millions to Harvard and MIT, funding programs in evolutionary dynamics. He successfully branded himself as a science philanthropist, surrounding himself with the Nobel laureates. He collected scientists the way other billionaires collected cars. Martin Nowak, a Harvard professor who received $30 million in funding, said Epstein collected scientists. By positioning himself as a patron of intelligentsia, he created a reputation shield. Who would suspect a man discussing theoretical physics with Stephen Hawking of running a ring? This brings us to the core mechanism of his shadow empire. Epstein didn't have a job in the traditional sense. His wealth came almost entirely from one client, Leslie Wexner. In 1991, Wexner gave Epstein full power of attorney, allowing him to hire people, sign checks, and buy properties on Wexner's behalf. Epstein used this unlimited access to capital to build what sociologists call a protective architecture. The plane brought him friends, the island gave him privacy, the donations gave him legitimacy, and the hidden cameras, they likely gave him immunity. He had built the perfect system. He had the money, the dirt, and the connections. He was untouchable. But in March 2005, a stepmother in West Palm Beach found $300 in her 14-year-old daughter's purse. The girl said she earned it giving massage to a wealthy man in a mansion on El Brillo Way. That single phone call to the Palm Beach police was about to crack the fortress wide open. Doston, by 2006, the Palm Beach Police Department thought they had him. Chief Michael Reiter had done what the FBI failed to do in 1996. He built a case. His detectives found the massage tables, the toys, the scheduling books. They had sworn statements from victims. They were ready to charge Jeffrey Epstein with multiple counts of unlawful sex with a minor and lewd molestation, crimes that carry life sentences. But then something strange happened. The local state attorney, Barry Christian, refused to file the serious charges. Instead, he did something Reiter called childish and distorted. He punted the case to a grand jury with a watered-down presentation, resulting in a single charge of solicitation. Chief Reiter, disgusted by the local politics, took his evidence to the feds, and for a moment, it looked like justice would finally be served. In 2007, federal prosecutor Mary Villafana prepared a 53-page draft indictment. This wasn't a slap on the wrist. It detailed crimes that would have put Epstein in federal prison for decades. But Epstein had an ace up his sleeves, a dream team of lawyers, including Alan Dorcius, a former Whitewater prosecutor Ken Starr. They didn't just fight the case in court, they fought it in the secret meetings with the US Attorney Alexander Acosta. What happened next is considered one of the darkest chapters in American legal history. Instead of filing the 53-page indictment, Acosta signed a non-prosecution agreement in 2008. This wasn't just a plea deal, it was surrender. Epstein pleaded guilty to two state prosecution charges. He served just 13 months in a country jail. But here is the double life twist. He was granted work release privileges so extraordinarily that he was allowed to leave his cell for up to 12 hours a day, 6 days a week, to go to his office. But the most terrifying clause was buried in the fine print. The agreement didn't just protect Epstein, it granted immunity to any potential conspirators. This effectively shuts down the FBI's probe into the powerful men who may have participated in the abuse. The government agreed to stop looking. The prosecutors violated the Crime Victims' Rights Act by deliberately concealing this deal from them until it was too late to object. They were told to have patience while the doors to the justice was slammed in their face. For the next decade, Epstein lived a double life. On paper, he was a registered. In reality, he was still Mr. Big. He continued to donate to Harvard and MIT. He continued to host Prince Andrew at his New York mansion in 2010. He continued to travel. The 2026 files reveal that during this period, even while on probation, he was allegedly trafficking new victims. The system didn't stop him, it managed him. He was a successful psychopath operating in the plain sight, protected by the very document designed to prosecute him. But the protective architecture had a flaw: the press. In late 2018, the Miami Herald published Preservation of Justice, exposing the secret negotiations of the 2008 deal. Public outrage forced the Southern District of New York to do what Florida wouldn't: open a new investigation. On July 6, 2019, Epstein returned from Paris on his private jet. He likely felt untouchable. He had beaten the system before. But as he stepped out of the tarmac at Teterboro Airport, FBI agents were waiting. When authorities raided his Manhattan townhouse the next day, they found the evidence of his double life frozen in time. Hundreds of photographs, CD labeled with victims' names, and a fake Australian passport with his photo but with different name. The sweetheart deal was dead. The 2008 immunity didn't apply in New York. For the first time in 20 years, Jeffrey Epstein wasn't sleeping in a mansion or a work release office. He was in the Metropolitan Correctional Center. He was finally in a cage. But as we all know, the story doesn't end with a trial. It ends with a body in a cell, missing video footage, and conspiracy theory that would break the internet. Because if Epstein talked, the immunity for those unnamed conspirators would vanish, and a lot of powerful people had a lot to lose. By late 2025, the pressure was no longer just social, it was legislative. For years, the internet had fueled conspiracy theories about a client list that the government was hiding, and in a rare moment of bipartisan unity, Congress forced the issue. Led by Democrat Ro Khanna and Republican Thomas Massie, the House used a discharge petition, a rare maneuver to bypass leadership, to force a vote on the Epstein Files Transparency Act. On November 18, 2025, the House voted 425 to 1 to rip the vault open. President Donald Trump, facing immense pressure despite his own past ties to Epstein, signed it into the law the next day. The law was clear. The Department of Justice had 30 days to release everything. No more secrets. But if you thought the government would simply hand over the keys, you haven't been paying attention. On the December 19 deadline, the DOJ released a fraction of the files heavily redacted, creating more questions than answers. It wasn't until January 30, 2026 that the floodgates truly opened. 3.5 million pages of documents, 2,000 videos, and 180,000 images were dumped onto the internet. This wasn't a curated list of villains, it was a data landfill. and buried in the trash were the diamonds of evidence that rewrote history. The files exposed the Gmail archives, Epstein's internal communications. We found out that the titans of tech weren't just distant acquaintances. In 2012, Elon Musk emailed Epstein asking what day or night will be the wildest party on your island. While Musk later claimed he never went, the familiarities is staggering. We found Howard Lutnick, the sitting US Command Secretary, scheduling a lunch visit to Epstein's island in December 2012 with his wife and children years after he claimed to have cut ties because he was revolted by Epstein. But the most legally significant revelation wasn't a celebrity, it was a pattern. For decades, billionaire Leslie Wexner claimed he was merely a victim of Epstein's fraud. But a 2019 FBI email finally unredacted this dump, explicitly listed Wexner as a co-conspirator who had been served a subpoena. While Wexner has never been charged, this document destroys the narrative that he was just a passive client. The FBI was looking at him as a part of the machinery. And then there are the precedents. The file contains photo of Bill Clinton in a hot tub and posing with Mike Jagger, placing him socially deeper in Epstein's circle than previously admitted. As for Donald Trump, the file contains a prosecutor's note from 2020 stating that flight logs showed Trump flew on Epstein's jet many more times than previously has been reported, including flights in the 90s where the only passengers were Trump, Epstein, and a third person. While the DOJ flagged some sensationalist tips against Trump as unfounded, the flight logs are hard data that contradict that claim he barely knew him. The shockwaves crossed the Atlantic. The file revealed that Peter Mandelson, a top British politician and former ambassador, may have leaked sensitive UK trade deal to Epstein. Mandelson resigned from the Labour Party days after the release. In Norway, a former prime minister was charged with corruption. This proves Epstein wasn't just running, he was running an intelligence network. He was trading information as currency. But here is the darkest twist of the 2026 release. In their rush, or perhaps their negligence, the DOJ failed to properly redact the files. They didn't just expose billionaires, they doxed the victims. Attorney for the survivors found the unredacted names, medical files, and driver license of women who has been abused as a children. One survivor, Anosuka de Georgia, saw her private details splashed across the internet. The system that failed to protect them as a girls failed to protect them again as a woman, re-traumatizing them in the name of transparency. The chaos reached a fever pitch when Congressman Ro Khanna, frustrated by the redactions, took to the House floor to read the name of redacted co-conspirators. He named 6 men. He was right about Wexner, but for the 4 of them, he was dead wrong. They turned out to be innocent men from a random police photo lineup that happened to be in the file. The vault was open, but it was messy, dangerous, and incomplete. And as the dust settled, one question remained. If the government was this incompetent with the files, how did they handle the most important asset of all, Jeffrey Epstein himself? Doston, if the 2008 non-prosecution agreement was a tragedy, what happened in February 2026 was a farce. The Epstein Files Transparency Act was supposed to be final chapter, the moment the US government finally came clean. Instead, it turned into a bureaucratic disaster that re-victimized the innocent and confused the guilty. The climax occurred on February 11, 2026, when Attorney General Pam Bondi faced the House Judiciary Committee. In the gallery behind her sat a row of women dressed in white, the survivors of Jeffrey Epstein. The tension in the room was palpable. Representative Pramila Jayapal asked the survivors to stand and raise their hands if they had been unable to secure a meeting with the DOJ. Every survivor raised their hands. Jayapal then asked Attorney General Bondi to turn around and apologized to them directly for the government's failures. Bondi refused. She called the request theatric and dismissed the hearing as a circus. While she stated she was deeply sorry for what victims went through, she refused to engage with the woman standing feet away from her. It was a moment that perfectly encapsulated the system's attitude: performative sympathy but no direct accountability. But the real scandal wasn't just the attitude, it was the incompetence. The DOJ had one job: release the files while protecting the victims. They failed catastrophically. Reports confirmed that the DOJ's sloppy redications exposed the full names, private medical files, and even driver's license of at least 43 survivors. Victim Anusuka DeGeorgius publicly stated that the government showed a profound disregard for the safety of women. Think about this irony. The Epstein Files Transparency Act was passed to expose the powerful men. Instead, the government's redications error exposed the victims to a new harassment. While lawyers for the survivors noted that Epstein's enablers continue to benefit from the secrecy, the system was so broken that it accidentally punished the people it was meant to save. The chaos reached a breaking point on February 20, 2026. Frustrated by the DOJ's secrecy, Congressmen Ro Khanna and Thomas Massie went to a secure room to view the unredacted files. Khanna then went to the House floor and read the name of 6 men he believed were likely incriminated. But here is the twist that proves how messy these files are. While Khanna correctly named billionaires Leslie Wexner, who was indeed listed as the co-conspirator in the 2019 FBI document, 4 of the other men he named turned out to be innocent. They weren't accomplices. They were random people from a police photo lineup that happened to be in the file. The DOJ had to issue a humiliating correction. This fog of war allowed actual perpetrators to hide behind the confusion. However, amidst the chaos, the file did trigger a reckoning, just not in America. In the UK, Peter Mandelson, a top Labour politician, resigned after files suggested he shared confidential government trade info with Epstein. In Norway, former Prime Minister Torbjørn Jagland was charged with gross corruption for his ties to the network. In Slovakia, top advisor Miroslav Lajcek resigned over text discussing young girls with Epstein. But in the United States, silence. Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanke admitted on national television that despite reviewing 6 million pages, that doesn't allow us necessarily to prosecute somebody. The 2026 files gave us the smoking gun document we suspected existed. An FBI email explicitly labeling retail billionaire Leslie Wexner as a second conspirator. Yet he remained uncharged. The files prove that Donald Trump flew on Epstein's jet many more times than previously reported. Yet it was dismissed as old news. This is the 2026 reckoning. We got the document, we got the photos, we got the emails, but we didn't get the justice. We got a digital dump that traumatized victims all over again, while the architecture of impunity remains standing. So, if the court won't act and the politicians are compromised, what is left? What is the final lesson of the Jeffrey Epstein saga for you and me? It turns out the answer isn't in the files, it's in the mirror. We began this story with a single ignored file from 1996. At the start, it looked like a bureaucratic accident, a missed opportunity. But after analyzing 30 years of evidence from the sweetheart deal to the catastrophic leaks of 2026, we must confront a harder truth. The system didn't fail Jeffrey Epstein's victim because it was broken. It failed them because it was working exactly as it was designed to. We often tell ourselves that justice is blind, but the Epstein archives prove that justice has a price tag. We saw protective architecture built not of bricks but of complicity, where scientists, princes, and presidents traded their moral compass for access to capitals. Epstein wasn't a glitch in the matrix of the global elite, he was a feature of it. He was the inevitable product of a culture that valued the genius of the billionaire over the safety of the child. And this is why it matters to you today. Because the Transparency Act of 2026 didn't give us closure, it gave us a warning. When the state was finally forced to speak, it stuttered. It accidentally exposed the survivors while continuing to redact the kings. It proved that even when the lights are turned on, the instincts of power is always to protect the palace, never the public. We keep looking for a monster to blame because monsters are anomalies, they can be killed. But Jeffrey Epstein was not an anomaly, he was a mirror. He showed us exactly what our world looks like when unchecked wealth meets unlimited access. He is gone, but the architecture that built him is still standing, waiting for the next tenant.